Hello and welcome to part 2 of Ainu and Guarani language comparison. In part 1, we analyzed 3 example sentences to understand how Ainu and Guarani sentences are built and how some affixes are used. In this part 2, we will analyze those and other affixes one by one so we can understand the complete structure of Ainu and Guarani verbs. Let us start by conjugating Ainu and Guarani verbs for the subject in the first, second, and third person singular. We saw examples with different verbs in the example sentences. In sentence 1 for the first person, in sentence 2 for the second, and in sentence 3 for the third. Let us conjugate the verbs in sentence 1, which are the verbs to listen and to sleep. I will use simple sentences with different tenses, moods, and aspects. Sentence 1. Oruspeanu okere. Kaujo endukuri. I listened to a story. The marker for the first person for the subject in anu and du is a. In Ainu, that is for the classical form. In the current spoken form, it is kunu. Okere kuri is an adverbial particle to show that the action is completed, so it is past. Ainu and Guarani use adverbial particles to show tense. 2. Uruspen urusuya, kaujo rendu chepa. Do you want to listen to a story? Enu, rendu, you listen. The prefix e, re, is for the second person. Rusui, che, is to show the desire. Ya and pa, we saw there are the question markers. So, do you want to listen to a story? 3. Oruspenu nankor, kaujo endurandau. He or she will probably listen to a story. Nu endu, we saw in part 1 that the marker for the third person is null in Ainu, no marker, and o in Guarani. So nu endu is he or she listens. Nankor randau is the adverbial particle to show what the speaker thinks may happen. So he or she will probably listen to a story. Verb to sleep. Nu manteta kumokor. Kue apu ake. I slept here yesterday. Kumokor ake is in the first person in everyday speech. The verbs in Ainu and Guarani are only conjugated for the present, but here we know the sentence is in the past tense because of the context. Numan kue, yesterday, indicates this is a past action. Sentence 2. Tete mokoruene. Apure keraetu. You will sleep here indeed. Emokor reke for the second person. Ruene raetu is to show something is evident to the speaker. So, you will sleep here indeed. You're going to sleep here. 3. Teta mokor hawe. Apuo kemanje. It seems he sleeps here. Mokor oke is for the third person. He or she sleeps. Hawe manje is reported evidence. What people said. What you have heard. So, teta mokor hawe apuo kemanje. It seems he or she is sleeping here. Let us now see the two verbs in a conjugation table. The transitive verb to listen and the intransitive verb to sleep. To complete the conjugation in first, second, and third person singular, we need to have a look at the indefinite third person that we saw in sentence 1 in the reply. Teta mokoran kusuen, apuo kiara modeve. As someone sleeps here, it is not alright. The suffix an, a, in the verb mokor, oke, is the suffix for the indefinite third person. To sleep is an intransitive verb, and now let's conjugate the indefinite third person for a transitive verb. We can use the same sentence with some small adaptation. In the question, in Ainu, teta oruspianu yakkapirkaya, we use it for the first person, but it can also refer to an indefinite third person. In the context or in the situation, we will know which one it is. So anu, in this sentence, we can also translate it as someone listens. In Guarani, Endo is the third person. A at the end indicates indefinite third person. In Guarani, it's always shown in this manner. So, tetorus piano yakapir kaya, apukaujo enduara niponapa. If someone listens to stories here, is it alright? Let us now see the complete conjugation of transitive and intransitive verbs, including the indefinite third person. Ainu and Guarani verbs are conjugated with prefixes in the first, second, and third person singular. When the third person is indefinite, we add a suffix or a prefix to the third person. In Guarani, it is always a suffix, a, and in Ainu, it's the suffix an for intransitive verbs and the prefix a for transitive verbs. As we saw in part 1, the focus of this video is to compare the verb structure for the first, second, and third person singular, plus all the affixes that can be attached to them. So let us now see the suffixes that can make the singular form plural. We saw in sentence 3 the suffix pa, which is exactly the same in both languages. Okayo utar hopumpa, awakuro owupa, the men all wake up. In the singular, okayo hopuni, awa owu, the man wakes up. The suffix pa is to make the plural form, so the subject is plural. To wake up is an intransitive verb, and let us now see an example with a transitive verb. I will introduce a new sentence, a simple one. Chikuni tuye, chaka ojaga, he or she cuts firewood. Tuye, jaga, is to cut, and it's conjugated for the third person. Now let's make the plural form of the verb. Top tuipa, takwa ojagapa, he or she cuts all the bamboos. So in this case, the plural form does not refer to the subject, but to the object. Let us see that in a table. Intransitive and transitive verbs have the same plural form with the suffix pa, but in the intransitive verbs, the plural form refers to the subject, and transitive forms refer to the object. An interesting plural form is of the verb to be, there is or there are, which doesn't use the plural form pa, but it uses a completely different form, and it uses even another form for the negative. Let us see this example from STV Ainu Radio Course, given by Kimura Sensei. Toanchise otta herumuan, tapanchise otta teta okai korkatane isam. Koa eopu anguchaoin, awa eopu kwe I kwai tein an daipoi. In this house, there is a mouse. In that house, there were mice long ago, but now there aren't any. It's remarkable that both languages have 3 different forms, and how similar the singular and the plural forms are. In Ainu, the plural form can be okai or oka, and in Guarani, it's ikwai, and there's also okwa as an auxiliary verb. An example is given in the PDF. Until here, we have seen different affixes that refer to the subject. And now we're going to see different affixes that refer to the direct object in different ways. Let's start with the affix for the reflexive form of the verb. In sentence 2, we saw eyairaike, rejejuka, you kill yourself. Yai, je is the affix to show reflexive form, and let's inflect it with another verb, with the verb to see. Ainu has 2 affixes for reflexive verbs, yai and shi. I was not able to find which one is used with the verb to see. If anyone knows, please let me know in the comments. So for nukaru, kushinukar, eshinukar, shinukar. Echa, ajecha, rejecha, ojecha. To see, I see myself, you see yourself, he or she sees himself or herself. So the reflexive affix goes between the prefix for the subject and the base form of the verb. It's always in the same position and it doesn't change, it's invariable. Now the reciprocal form we saw in sentence 3. Ueneuser, joguerawu, they speak to one another. U, jo is to show the action is reciprocal, means to one another. Now let's inflect it again with the verb to see. I will introduce the conjugation for the second person plural. In Ainu, echinukaru is you see, echiunukaru, you see one another. In Guarani, pecha is you see, pejoecha, you see one another. The third person, unukaru, joecha, they see one another. So, for the subject in the third person, in Ainu, there's no marker, and in this case, also in Guarani, the absence of marker shows its third person. So this affix also goes between the subject and the base form of the verb. Now the personal affixes for the direct object. We saw in sentence 2, hapuenukaru, haiderecha, mother sees you or mother saw you. I'm introducing the first person as well. Hapo ennukaru, haicherecha, mother sees me. So the affixes for the direct object for the first person singular in Ainu is en, in Guarani che, which is me. For the second person singular in Ainu is e, in Guarani is de, in English you. For the direct object in the third person singular, we use the verb conjugated for the subject, because without a marker, a transitive verb always refers to a direct object in the third person. We don't use it, him, or her because it's always implied. We also saw in sentence 2 that these affixes are used to inflect postpositions. We saw hekote, katu, joined with an a to the affix, which is towards. So in hekote, chiakatu is towards me, and hekote deakatu is towards you. One more example with another postposition. Tura, reve, which is with. Entura, chereve, with me. Etura, dereve, with you. With a noun, hapotura, haireve, with mum. Let us now see the different affixes that we analyzed in the comparison table. The personal prefixes for subject and object in the first, second, and third person singular. We also saw the indefinite third person after the base form of the verb with a similar sound in both languages. And in Ainu, when the verb is transitive, the affix maintains the sound a as in Guarani, but it is placed in another slot in the first column. And now the suffix pa for the plural form, which is exactly the same in both languages. It makes the subject plural when the verb is intransitive, and when the verb is transitive, it makes the direct object plural. So, pa is exactly the same for both languages in form, function, and position. We also saw the reflexive and the reciprocal affixes, which also sound very similar, and they occupy the same position. So, this is what we have seen so far. In part 3, we will finish analyzing the other affixes. So that is all for part 2. Please leave your comments below. Share this video if you think it may be of interest to others. And I hope to see you again in part 3.